Jeremy here, Damn Good Doctors Club. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the paradox of a growth mindset. And there's a serious and very significant downside to having a growth mindset. Now, of course, there's a plus side, right? But like I said, it's a paradox. And if you're not aware of this, if it's a blind spot for you, then it's very possible that you're kind of falling into some self-repeating loops that are keeping you stuck. So this is the paradox, right? How the growth mindset keeps you stuck. We're going to take a look at how it applies to us as professionals. Also, just know that your patients are also human. This is a human trait, right? So the more you learn about yourself and your own personal cultivation, the more you will see reflected in your patients, so you can understand better what they're going through so that you can actually help them, right? So that then you can have a successful practice and a fulfilling career, which is kind of what we all came here for, right? I'm a Eastern medicine acupuncturist, right? That's where my foundation is. But no matter if you're naturopath, functional medicine, right, chiropractor, MD, DO, RN, midwife, right, whatever, you got into a healing profession to actually make an impact and help other people. So sometimes you can get baseline results with just the techniques that you learned as part of your training, etc. But if you want to get to another level, you're going to have to develop yourself in a way that requires fearless introspection. And I'm going to be guiding you on some of that, right, a sliver of that in today's video. And the reason why we're doing this is so we can understand ourselves, we can get out of our own way in terms of our growth in life, and we can also help our patients actually grow into the future that they're coming for. Because how are you supposed to lead somebody down a path that you don't understand yourself? All right, let's get started. So a growth mindset is usually a good thing, right? A very good thing. But just like any other good thing, there can be a downside, there can be a drawback, there can be a paradox. So the trouble, okay, that happens, and I'm just going to tell you, I've fallen into this too. I've noticed this in myself, which is one of the reasons why I can explain it. And I'm working on my own internal systems to handle this paradox, so I don't keep falling into it as a trap, right? But what you got to understand is that when you have a growth mindset, that means that your subconscious really enjoys growth. Now, what does growth entail, right? Growth means we're coming out of our comfort zone and we're going to a new place, right? What happens there? Uncertainty. The unknown is there. It's exciting. Yeah. And in fact, when we have a growth mindset, we're not scared of that, right? That helps us push through some of the fear of the uncertainty, right? And the fear of the unknown, because the pain of that fear is less than the pain of not growing, okay? For people with a higher growth mindset. It just matters a little bit how you're wired, how your subconscious is wired. And can you train this? Right, which is a whole other conversation where we look at subconscious jujitsu. It's a whole different deal. So in this video, we're just going to stick to this one part, right? One paradox. So when you have a growth mindset, you love growth, you love that feeling. And what that means is that you're actually comfortable in discomfort. Okay, this is where it starts to get really interesting, because by nature, if you love growth, then what comes with growth is transition periods, right? Little places of uncertainty. And most people don't like uncertainty, and they want to get it over with as soon as possible. But if you're a very high growth mindset person, then it's very likely that you actually don't mind uncertainty, and these transitions that you're in, you actually don't mind stretching them out. So it takes longer to get from point A to point B, just because the flavor of a transition is so nurturing, right, to your subconscious, because you love growth. And growth tastes like transitions. Right? So the longer you can make your transitions, then the more you feel like you're growing every day. Now, what I'll offer you is to look at this as it's a way to live your life, right? It's a philosophy, which is great, but you can also look at it as a very strong pitfall in terms of staying stuck. And how does this work, right? Because when we have a question, that is the little tip of the branch, right, of the tree. Imagine tree branches, yeah? There's like a couple roots, and then it becomes many, right, on all the leaves. So if you're asking a question, oftentimes it lives on the leaves, it's in the branches. It's a very fine-tuned branch question. So for example, right, my colleagues, fellow practitioners, I'm mentoring some people now, right? It's been really interesting, very high-touch environment. And the questions I'm seeing probably about 70% of the time have to do with getting new patients. Right? I'm having trouble getting new patients. I need more patients. Or if they have like a business training, they'll use different terminology, right? They'll say, I need better marketing, or I need to work on my attraction efforts, or I need to learn advertising, or I need to find hotter leads, right? These are all variations of it's the same question, right? How do I get more people into my world? And that's something that is one question. And it's an important question, and I agree it should be asked. I've asked it a lot, right? It's never going away, this question, right? It's always going to be there. And I would also offer that there are more important questions that we should be asking ourselves. If our goal is not just to get more patients coming into our practice, if our goal is to actually have a long-term career, right, that influences people and impacts lives without causing burnout for you, right, and of course it's financially viable and you can enjoy a decent quality of life, right? And if we want to push that even further and say we want time freedom and we want geographical freedom, okay, that all can be done, right? But that requires asking much, much larger questions. So my goal, whenever a new practitioner comes into my world, is to try to guide that question, right? Try to guide that conversation from something small and important, right? It's not insignificant. Like, how do I get more patients, right? It's very, very important. But we also need to look at things that are much larger and much more significant. So for example, right, to be specific, how do I get new patients? Maybe we need to start looking at how do you find the people who are going to be your best patients, right? Maybe take more of a quality over quantity type of lens, right? But even that kind of comes from understanding some larger forces, refining your mission statement, right? Because if you're going to try to help as many people as possible, that's something that I used to say, and that was as far as I got with my career, right? I want to help as many people as possible. And what I've learned since then is I have to actually refine, right, what the word help means, because help doesn't mean, for me, it doesn't mean that I do it for them, right? It means that I help empower them. I help empower as many people as possible, right? It's a whole different deal. Helping somebody by giving them a crutch or helping somebody by teaching them how to strengthen their own ankle, right? That kind of metaphor, right? Helping somebody by giving them a fish or teaching them to fish, right? That's the old school one. So this kind of idea, how do I help as many people as possible? Well, you can do a tiny amount, for a bunch of people, which is one way to do it. Or you can start to find what help really means is that you're going to empower somebody. And oftentimes, to empower a patient is a longer-term working relationship, right? Which means it's going to require more of your attention, which means that you can only handle so many patients at that depth. Yeah. So we know that we can go for quality over quantity. We know that because it's a big, big world. And then the internet makes it smaller and we can find people, right, that are perfect fits to work with. So our question isn't how do I find more patients, right? Because you'll just get more patients. And what happens when you get more patients, right? Once you solve that, once you check that box, then immediately you got another question. Okay, how do I get better patients, right? Because the ones I'm getting aren't a good fit, or they're not a good match for my program, or their mindset's kind of weird, or whatever it is, right? You're getting all these problems, all these objections, all these bumps in the road that we thought if we rubbed a genie lamp and our first wish was for more patients, right? We thought we'd just be happy and we only needed the one wish. But it turns out, once you get the more patients, then you not only need to be able to filter them to make sure that you're going to have a good chance of success with them, right? I do not take on a case that I don't think I can severely impact in a positive way, right? So you've got to have ways to get your prognosis, right? You got to have ways to really look at that so that you're not wasting people's time or their money or your attention. Because how many times can you fail clinically, right? If your batting average really stinks before you burn out. So to preserve your own sanity, you start specializing a little bit to take cases that are going to be a better fit, right? I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit because all these things are related. It's fractal, the way you set up your business. So every little chunk, like your attraction efforts, your conversion efforts, right, which means like education, all these things that you're doing, they all kind of feed each other and they all contain each other in some unit. So when you have these conversations, it does become pretty non-linear as you dart around. But again, I find that restricting my interactions to practitioners that can think that way in the first place, or at least open to it, that makes my life a lot easier in terms of mentorship. So it's a bit of a filter there as well. It's happening in real time. So if we look at all these things, right, we can keep zooming out the question and we can say, okay, how do you actually, you get all these new patients in and actually they're great fits, but now they're not completing your program. So now how do you actually make a better program that they will complete? How do you get better at your clinical treatments and your algorithms and the way you're thinking, right, so that they actually get the results they want? Because I don't know how you're measuring success, and I may evolve this, but currently I'm measuring success by my impact in the people's lives that I come into contact with, right? The patients I see, practitioners I mentor, like either way, what I want, the metric I'm looking for is when they come back and say, I see my life in 2 phases, before I met you and after, right? Or some variation of that. When you can have that kind of impact for somebody else, it's deeply satisfying and you know that your work's getting through. Right? So when I say, I want to help as many people as possible, I want to help as many people to that level where they see their life as fundamentally changed for having come into contact with my work, right? You want to create that too, I would think, something like that, right? Where you know that you're making an impact. But that also means sometimes that you're going to have to refine. It's not just like more patients, forever. You're going to have to find those people who are ready for what it is you do in that way, right? And how to take people who are almost ready and help them grow into the person who is ready. And this is where the growth mindset kind of comes full circle here, is because if you have a growth mindset, you may not be interested in actually answering those bigger questions that I just discussed, because what that might imply is that you could actually solve this thing, right? You could actually get your success, which is actually the paradox, the dark secret here is for a growth mindset, getting your success is actually horrible because you've finished growing, right? That's the perspective. Now, is that a perfect perspective? Is it accurate? Is it true? I'm not so sure about that, right? But that's sometimes the way we see it in our subconscious. Our subconscious feels loss, right? And if our subconscious loves that feeling of growth and transition, then we know for a fact when the transition ends, the subconscious won't feel that same growth feeling. Your ego, your subconscious, right? It knows that that loss is potentially there, right? So it'll find ways to keep you in grow mode. Okay, think about that. So the more questions you have unanswered, right? The more open transitions you have, and actually it's kind of a twist of fate here, but like the farther you are from your goal, or how fractally minute you can make it away from your goal, right? Those are both big growth feeders. You could think, oh, I've got like, so much more to go. And your subconscious mind is just chowing down on that feeling of growth, right? Because I just started out. I'm 1% of the way there. I love it, right? We're going to be growing. Or I've only got 1% left to go, right? And now your subconscious mind's freaking out and trying to make that last 1% last forever, right? Trying to stretch it out. So what happens, right? In a practical sense, this is the behind the scenes. These are some of the things I'm looking at, when I'm interacting with people that I'm trying to help. So I'm trying to figure out how they're thinking so I can help them adjust their thinking so they can see what I see so they can get the future they deserve, right? So if we look at this and go, okay, how do we get more patients? And then I say, well, that's a great question. Here's how you do it. Here's some techniques, technicals, right? Things to do, software to use, whatever, all this stuff. And that now, let's look at some bigger questions like, what are you going to do with all those new patients? Do you have systems set up so you're not trading your time for money all the time? Could you be geographically independent if you wanted to? You don't have to, but could you if you wanted to, right? Time independence. I know when I went online the first time, I took my practice and I kind of turned it into a telehealth. This was back in like 2016 or 17. And I realized that, I'll just copy my practice model of, so I just turned it into like Zoom calls, basically. It was Skype and FaceTime and stuff back then. But you're just doing these telehealth video chats. And I realized that my schedule was full of ink again. I didn't actually set myself time free. So there are better ways to do it, right? And you can learn this. So when I shift the conversation that way, and then I can feel the resistance, like, yeah, well, what we likely have here is somebody who needs to recalibrate their growth mindset because they're focusing on keeping these tiny branches, right? These like little twiggies, right? Trying to keep these little twiggies growing, and especially if you can keep them growing in tiny, never-ending, overthinking circles, right? Then you'll always feel like you're growing, even if you're just growing around a spiral and not growing up and out, right? So it's how we feed our subconscious that will change some of the results we get. And you need to be aware of this for yourself because guess what? You're human, I'm human. How do you think I figured this out? I caught myself doing it, right? And I detangled it, decoded it, and I'm sharing that, right? So you get some insight that way, right? So you can use my mental pain and anguish of having to do all these things and be vigilant and everything. You can save yourself some suffering and just take my word for it, right? And then start exploring from there. So we do this, I do this, you do this, your patients do it too. And they're going to do it in different forms. And a lot of times you may think, hey, I want patients with a good growth mindset. Well, guess what? You better be ready to have this kind of conversation with them at some level if you see that growth mindset is becoming a problem. Because it's not about your medicine, your technicals. That's a small piece of it. There's so much else tied to the patient's success, including the way you show up, which is why when we do, it's Damn Good Doctors Club, right? That's what I created because I needed to have a place. I needed to have a little home for my professional mentorships. So in Damn Good Doctors Club, we've got 3 branches, basically 3 pillars of what we look at to get your personal and professional life together. And the first one's personal cultivation. Right? And this means doing this kind of stuff, right? These mental self-audits, we're looking at all kinds of things, adaptive challenges, secondary gains, right? I teach you the best forms of subconscious jujitsu that I've yet found or developed so that you can start to train your brain for real to now operate in a way where it's out of its own way. so you're not making these kinds of paradoxes, right? Once you have that, now you've got that superpower installed. You will never not see it on other people when they're doing it. And then you can help them through that too, right? Just like I'm doing to you, and you pass it on. It's a pay it forward kind of thing, you know? So personal cultivation is really important. That feeds into also leadership skills, right? Because the better you know yourself, then you can actually become a better leader, which is what I described here about being able to recognize these patterns, take people down a path that you've taken yourself that you know very, very well. They can feel that. They want help from people who are a seasoned guide, right? And if you can take them places, especially within their own internal growth that they haven't been, that's a gift. Their life will never be the same after having met you, right? For me, success. Happy about that. So we have personal cultivation. The second one is clinical clarity. And what that means is getting your clinical thinking in order, right? Very tidied up. And I didn't touch on that too much in this video, but the idea with clinical clarity is you start to develop a framework so that if you help one person with a specific problem, you now can discover the process that you used that was probably subconscious to you. You can refine it, you can kind of tune it up, and that way you can help everybody else you meet on the planet that has that same problem, right? Which might not mean you help them in the exact same way, but your process you develop becomes something you can take people through so they can get a unique treatment plan within a universal system. It's really amazing. And I learned this, I had my eyes open to this by some great mentorship that I had, incredible thinking physicians. And I've just taken it and expanded it and found some of the hidden workings underneath. So the way you think about your medicine will definitely shape, absolutely, like the results you get, right? And then we tie this all together. Our third pillar is fractal systems. So we got personal cultivation, clinical clarity, fractal systems. That should keep you busy, right? You like to grow? Get into there. You can do all these things and you're going to see growth every day. So fractal systems is how we actually implement, right? Your clinical clarity algorithm, right? Your mental thought process about how you're handling your patients. And we implement that in a way that's consistent and has integrity with your actual values and what you've cultivated with your own personality. Because I maintain, and I'm going to keep saying this, I maintain that if you treat your practice, whether you're brick and mortar, online, or a hybrid, if you treat it like a living thing, like a living organism, you will find out that it is. And what I mean by that is that we have a deep understanding of human physiology and the systems of the body. And we know how to interact with that. We know how to diagnose it. We know how to find pathologies. We know how to treat it. And hopefully, if you're anywhere near where you need to be in your career, in terms of just basic competency to sit at the table, then you understand the difference between branch symptomatic treatments and you understand root thinking, right? That's not the top of the mountain. That's basically just to show up at the table, you got to understand that, right? If you understand that about the human body, guess what? The same thing's going on in your practice because your practice is a living system. And the core of that living system is your top of your head, straight down your body, right? That is your axis and your whole world radiates off of that. And the people that come into contact with you are feeling that. They're in your field. And that field is charged with personal cultivation, right? Or your lack thereof. All these little things, looking at blind spots, being able to identify that. It's extremely important, extremely important. So we work on creating our own internal world, creating our own external world. When we get to fractal systems, that's where we look at technicals of how do I get new patients? Great, yeah, let's do it, right? But then we're going to answer some more questions in there. How do I educate those patients? How do I filter them and find out if some aren't a good fit? How do I even have that conversation, right? Without being rude. How do I do all this? And then how do I overcome my own personal resistance at each stage of growth? Going, yeah, I don't know. I'm not really that assertive, or well, it's time to work on that. You need to protect your future self. You need to protect all your future patients, right? Because if you burn out, you're not helping anybody. Future's gone. So don't leverage your future, right? To just accommodate some kind of self-sabotage now. It doesn't make any sense, yet we all do it, right? Myself included. So you're in good company, right? But if you have a growth mindset, you're going to want to get better. So when I steer the conversation over to this kind of thing, then, you know, if you get resistance there, it's likely because you're getting some kind of benefit of staying where you are. And oftentimes that comes up with growth mindset people. And it takes one to know one. So if you enjoy these types of conversations, if these themes are helping you in your personal or professional growth, because those two are intertwined, right, you might do well to join our group. So it's a chat group. It's free to join as a guest. I do have obviously paid programs, mentorships. I'm not cheap to work with. Why would you trust me if I was, right? Why would I be? I highly value the work I'm doing and the people I'm working with and the long-term relationships that we're forging, because that's where transformative processes happen, right? Long-term. It's not a 6-week program. You know, you got to be thinking in longer intervals. So you'll find your application below. I'll take a look. All right, let's get to work.